I'm gonna, before we get into like the actual stuff that's about football, just a very short like introduction, what your name is, if you have like a thing that you like doing, hobbies, etc. Yeah. It can be football, by the way. It can be football.
It always is football. I'm Kaz, I'm 26, 27 next week, feeling old. I go by they, them pronouns, identify as transmasculine or non-binary, and yeah, I like to think I can play football. That's about as far as my personality goes, is football is kind of my life, so yeah.
That's great, because we're here to talk about football. Hey! Yeah, okay, I'm going to start really simple. Can you tell me a little bit about how you first got into football and when that was?
Yeah. So I got into football probably late in terms of actually playing for a team, but I always played like on my own in the garden and like with family, but I was quite a shy kid and didn't really have the confidence to join a team until I went to secondary school. And obviously PE teachers were like, you're really good, like who'd you play for? And I was like, no one, like I don't play at all. They tried to make me join the school team, which I did, and I think you realise, don't you, that you've got a bit of something from a young age. So I was like, oh, like maybe I do have the confidence to do it because I've got the talent there. And yeah, from there it kind of just like went really quick. I played a few games for school, and then I got scouted for Man United. From there I went to ManCity, and it just kind of snowballed, and then it suddenly became the thing that I do, kind of thing, yeah.
Sorry, holy shit. Sorry, it's just because Rika got in touch with you. It was like, there's a footballer in Manchester. And I was like, that's great, I'd love to talk to a footballer in Manchester. You're like an actual professional football player.
Well, no, I play in Tier 3 right now, so it's classed as maybe semi-professional. But yeah, from like a young age, I was always involved in like academies, and yeah, I think I was at United for 5 years, and then I went to City for 2. Yeah, so it was a good experience from a kid who didn't want to join a school team, and then all of a sudden being scouted. But it's a funny story with United because I was playing against them in like a school final, so they were Manchester Borough, we were playing for Oldham, and the manager, who I owe a lot to, who I used to play for at United, she came up to me after the game and said, oh, like you had a really good game there, and I had a bit of a attitude problem for losing. Always been a bit competitive, so I just turned around and was like, oh, like I had a bit of a huff, and then someone said like, that's the like kind of under 13s manager, like oversees it all, and I was like, oh, great. Great, blown my chance there, but they ended up getting in touch, and it took a while, but I managed to get through the trial stages, and spent my whole like up until I was 16 at United, so it was a great experience.
Sorry, I'm a little bit in awe now.
Don't be silly.
I was just, not that I haven't enjoyed talking with everybody, but I was just, I feel like maybe I should have done research, but I was just kind of like, actually I don't want to know nothing about people before I start talking to them, so this is completely new information to me.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really go about saying it, because it seems ages ago now that I was there, but yeah, seeing how far it's come, it's crazy, because I mean, not a lot of people can say, oh, I played for Manchester United and Manchester City, so it's a good experience and memories to look back on. Definitely seeing how far it's come. You had to like get about 4 buses every training session. Like my mum used to take me every single week, and it took about 3-4 hours sometimes to get to training and stuff, but she did that for like 5 or 6 years to make sure that I, continued to push in my hobby. So yeah,
I love playing
paid off. Yeah.
So sporty.
Oh, my mum's amazing. Yeah.
Cool. Which team do you play for now?
So now I play for Huddersfield, so we're in Tier 3 of the Women's Pyramid, and yeah, I love it.
You play for Huddersfield?
Yeah.
That's like around the corner from where I live.
Is it? No way.
It's not that far from where I live.
Really?
Yeah,
that's
take a bus
crazy.
there.
No way. Yeah, I play at Huddersfield. Yeah. So after I played at City, got dropped from City, and then ended up going to Sheffield, which obviously is a while away. So we got the train. Me and my best friend used to get the train, get the buses, get taxis, sometimes get lifts off players. So yeah, we did that for 2 seasons as well. So I'm blessed now to say, obviously I can drive places, but I used to love it, mate, to be fair. All the travelling and stuff, I got to see so many different places. But yeah, I did a lot of travelling when I was younger for football. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Gosh, okay, well, you're kind of a rare person that I've talked to.
Oh, thank you.
In that most people that I've talked to had a break that was related to coming out and or transitioning. Not everybody's transitioned.
Yeah.
But like, it sounds like you've been playing pretty steadily throughout.
Yeah. That's probably like the interesting thing is I knew from a young age that I didn't feel like a girl, didn't feel like a boy, wasn't kind of sure if there was a middle ground to that. So I came out very young when I was like, I think 11, I think I came out. So everyone assumed it was like, everyone saw that I was gay. It wasn't really a surprise to family or friends or anything. But even when I come out, I had this kind of internal identity crisis still of being like, this still don't feel right. Even though like I knew I fancied girls, I felt gay, but myself, when people would call me a girl, say she, because I didn't know any different, I didn't understand that there was another terminology for what I was feeling. So I just took it on as, oh, I'm gay, I'm a girl, I'll take it. And it wasn't until like a lockdown when I started seeing it on TikTok and I started learning more about what non-binary meant, like trans and like the umbrella of it all, and I started thinking, yeah, like this relates to me. But in terms of football, I knew once I'd come out that now I felt comfortable in my identity, that there'd be certain things if I did choose to medically transition that I would probably have to give up the one thing that I've loved all my life. And I didn't want to do that. So it's been a strange like battle with myself in terms of knowing that I want to play for as long as I can, but also balancing the dysphoria that comes along with it. Playing in the women's game, I am understanding of the fact that not everyone's going to know about me and know about my individual identity. So I do kind of get called she, get called a girl quite often, and it's hard to take on, but I've kind of learnt to build a mental strength to deal with that in order to pursue my passion, which is probably a conversation we need to speak about, because there's people who do quit, and I've spoke to a lot of people and they've said, oh, when I come out, that was it, because they didn't feel like there was another avenue to go down. I've been lucky that that's not been my experience and I've got to play, but I also understand there's a lot of people who feel like there's no other option but to quit, which is a shame.
Yeah, it's because so there's a few people who started coming out as well in various professional spaces. There's a non-binary player in Canada. There's Quinn. Yeah. There's Kumi Yokomato, I think, who's playing in America.
Yeah.
There's you. There's I think Parker as well, who played on the. I don't actually know what team Parker plays for, but was playing on the transmasc team that played in London the other day.
Yeah.
The other day, it's been like a couple of months. It's just very exciting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Did you know about that?
Is that the one who scored the goal?
That's the person who scored the goal.
Yeah. Yes, I saw that. I was buzzing. Yeah.
I still need to properly sit down and like. Because I've seen a couple of clips, but I haven't sat down and seen like how much of it was.
Yeah.
Because I've talked to a couple of people who were actually at the match, like who were playing at the match. Because it seems like there might have been an open call out. I don't know how it was. I had no idea that it happened until after it happened, which is really embarrassing. Because people were like, "Oh, this is so relevant to what you're doing." And I was like, "Yeah, sure is."
I didn't know about it.
No, that's fine. There's another one that's going to be happening. I don't know if it's a transmasc team versus a cis-guys team, or if it's like just trans teams, or how it's going to work. But there is another match happening the day after Trans Pride Brighton. So I'm also just letting people know about that if they didn't know about it, because I'm like, I really want to go to that.
Yeah, it seemed well received, to be fair. From what like I saw, even from like cis people and stuff, like no one's seen it. Usually sometimes when stuff gets posted on social media, you expect a bit of backlash, don't you, from ignorant people, but it seemed to be really well received, so it was nice to actually see that.
Yeah. And like I had people from America talking about it.
Oh really?
Because I have a separate project that I'm not talk about, but it involves some Americans. And they during a meeting with them, they were like, oh, so the thing that you're doing, is it connected to this thing that happened? And I was like, not technically, but also kind of, because some of the people involved were there.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh shit, people in America.
That's crazy. Yeah. Reaching.
So it seems like I know that I'm talking a lot right now, but I just because I'm like, but like it seems like because when I first started this project, and when I was first looking into this project, I think I mentioned to you that was like 2 years ago. I wasn't really finding stuff, or like I wasn't finding spaces that were necessarily like really thinking about transmass people. I don't want to find spaces that were thinking
Well, it's a difficult way to look, isn't it? Where to start?
Yeah.
Because it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems like this year even that a lot has happened, and maybe like what you were saying as well. Like you mentioned that you like were able to look into some of the terminology over COVID.
Yeah.
Again, there's a couple of people that I talked to who had the exact same experience. I mean, probably not the exact same, but like over COVID being like, I have time to just sit and like
think about it. Yeah. I think a lot of people did that.
Yeah.
Even nothing to do with like gender or sexuality, just people had time to like sit and think. And a lot of people seem to say about TikTok and social media that a lot of trans people and queer people and non-binary people are jumping on trends, and I think it's just a case of no one had the terminology and no one understood how to express themselves until other people from all over the world was like, this is how I feel, and then it was like, oh, that's exactly how I feel as well, and it was like, well, we're not all making it up, there must be a term for it. And obviously non-binary, trans, like these terms have existed for years and years and years, it's just it hasn't been normalised and accepted the way it should be. So yeah, I think social media's done such a good job, to be honest.
Yeah. I'm usually quite a social media phobe, but just in terms of this, I'm like, oh yeah, no, absolutely, this is really what it. I mean, this is what it is as an ideal. I think it's less that I'm against social media and more that I'm like the way that people often use it. I'm like, I can't get on board with that, and also I'm a hermit. But like, I love what it has been able to do for people. Also, complete side note to any of this and also football, but first gender neutral pronoun was actually invented in the 1800s.
Really?
So it did not catch on, but it was something that people were thinking about.
Yeah.
So like, it's not new.
No. A lot of people say that with like language and stuff. I didn't know that there's languages where there isn't gender pronouns in the first place, and like there's places all over the world where it has been normalised, but I feel like England and America and like the Western world, we think we're the only people who exist, so we think like, oh yeah, we don't do it, so it's not real, whereas it's like, no, it's been being practiced and spoken about, and there's been conversations around it since the beginning of time. It's just we haven't brought it into our culture.
Exactly. Bringing it back to football, although there's a really interesting separate conversation there about like
we'll have that.
about like sports and spirituality and gender, but I feel like that might be getting into like
oh, I've got so many opinions
on
that.
No, actually, if you do have something to say to that, you totally can. But like just to be here for a second, because you've been playing on girls' teams and women's teams, right? If you say utopian world, 50 years from now, let's say it's 50 years from now, I'm such an optimist, in which, say the structure could be whatever it is that you think would be an ideal structure.
Yeah.
What kind of teams do you think that you would love to play on? And also, like, what kind of teams do you think there should be generally? Like, should it be mixed leagues, or like there are men's, women's, and trans leagues, and then there's also the gay league, which also is currently existing, and but like broad question. You can make it really specific to yourself if you want, or you can go on whatever tangent you feel like.
Oh, okay. I think because someone's asked me a similar question before, and I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people see it as, by adding queer spaces, by trans inclusion in sports, it's taken away from men's and women's sports in general, and it's not. It's just adding another option to include everyone, and I think that's probably the starting point. Is it's not so much, oh, there's too many categories, or we need to exclude this or segregate this. It's just there should be an accessible option, a category for everyone. When I did, I think I did a panel discussion, and then I did a magazine article, and it got posted on quite a big platform, and they'd already warned me prior that the audience was middle-aged cis men. It was probably not going to get a good reaction, but I still wanted to do it because I wanted to put people's story out there. I feel like sometimes you almost got a responsibility and duty when you're one of the only people who can speak about it. So the backlash from that, a lot of people were saying, well, if you no longer identify as a girl, then you shouldn't be in women's sport, you shouldn't be in girls' sports, go play in a non-binary team. And my point is that all my life I've had a community, a family of people who has been girls and has been women, and that is my space, even though I myself don't identify with that gender anymore, that is my space. Now, if there was options where I could play in a gender neutral team where the level was where it's at, unfortunately because of resources, because of like attitudes towards trans inclusion, there isn't the option for me to go and play at the level I'd want to in a team of people who are like-minded like me. So my response to them was almost, where would you want us to go? If like, because there isn't an option. So it's not so much that we're trying to take anything away from anyone, we just want the space as well. So yeah, I think it's just a case of starting from the root issue, which is schools, like playing out, like anything. Kids from young need to be taught that everyone should have a space to be included into, and then I think that'll kind of translate into adulthood and into the organisations and into the FA or whatever it might be. I just think at the minute they're very close-minded in how they want to include trans people.
It was just really interesting because I was at the National Foot Museum yesterday.
Did you go?
I did go, yeah.
Yes, did you like it?
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's good.
I spent a lot of time in the bits that were about women's football, because it almost felt like two museums in one in a way. Like it was like, and here's these managers for this English football team and all these guys throughout the years, and I was like, and then there was a separate museum that was like, and here's, or like a separate bit that was like, and here's how women have managed to play despite the FA for like a lot of years before they were even like allowed to register as FA teams. And I was interested in the fact that there was, I think it was short-lived, I took a bunch of pictures, I need to like look through them again, but like I think there was a short-lived like women's league that was like apart from the FA, and I was almost like, why did the FA like then try to like take that away and then make it part of the FA? That almost seems, I don't know, I'm like, that's shady. But but I'm it does make me think about like the potential to build spaces bit by bit that I'm not going to put you in trouble, but like either are apart from the FA maybe, or that like, well, apart from the FA, but then like in a way where like maybe bottoms, like from the bottom up rather than from the top down is where the change is happening. But obviously for you that because like you were talking about, you're like actually at a professional level, so like I've obviously talked to a lot of people who are playing in grassroots spaces and they have like trans inclusionary policies, but they're not allowed to register with the FA. So they've got their own separate world happening, but it's also not at your level. So you know.
I don't know if I'm allowed to, because there's another trans player who plays in the league, well, played in the league, she's retired now, but she played in the women's spaces. Can I talk about her or not? It's interesting because I wasn't even aware that there was another like trans player who played in the league that I played in, until we played like against her, and then she followed me and I was like, oh, like wow, like you don't realise like people can get to this level if they have the support and the resources and the team who's willing to include them in those spaces. But there's a lot of people who do feel like grassroots is as far as they could go, and I do think that's because of like limitations that and boundaries that are put in place, which doesn't allow trans people to go to the next level that they might want to. And again, it's about the opportunity to be able to play in them spaces if they want to. But a lot of people feel like they're limited to grassroots and lower leagues because they know it's almost going to be easy for them to be accepted, which should never be a case. It should be a case of if you're a talented footballer and you want to play at a certain level, you should be able to do that. And like I say, that's probably one of the things that's stopped me from wanting to transition in any way medically, because I'm not sure how certain organisations would allow me to then play. So Yeah.
So this player, she's a trans woman?
Yeah, she's a trans woman, yeah.
Okay, so, and she, because there's, the rulings are that, the rulings are a certain level of testosterone is allowed.
I think so.
So you have to be on estrogen and then prove that which again is also kind of like, but if you're forcing people to put their football career on hold in order to take estrogen, then by the time they're at a level where they're legally allowed to play, they're just not going to have had the amount of training.
Exactly. And that's it. I think there's such a big discussion there at the minute with especially trans women. I feel like trans men and non-binary people, it's almost like, it's kind of like blindfold, whereas trans women, it's like spotlight, like they shouldn't be playing in women's spaces. Whereas, like, this goalkeeper, she's a great goalkeeper, and it was never a case of what she was born as or how she identifies. She was just a good goalkeeper. But on a more personal note, I found it interesting that anytime we played against her, I could take it as a learning experience and an educational experience, because there'd be other players who obviously I wouldn't name or anything, but there'd be players, maybe managers, that I would have to educate, because they'd be not ill-intentioned or malicious, but there might be a comment, and I'd then take that as a educational kind of way to say, look, like, this is a situation, and then I think that's a good way to get people to start to understand more about trans inclusion and like gender non-conforming people and just gender identity in general. It's a good place to start by, when you see it, call it out, educate people, and I think that's a good kind of starting point, especially in football, because at the end of the day, we're the ones playing in it. So if I have a responsibility to see another trans person and someone may, I don't know, misgender or anything, whatever it might be, I thought it was a good opportunity for me to take that kind of responsibility and say, look, you're my teammate, but this is a situation, like, yeah.
You can protect each other.
Exactly, that's kind of how it felt, yeah.
Oh, I'm pleased about that.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good, like, just in the little bits where... Yeah.
And she probably doesn't know that. That's what's crazy, is like, I feel like a lot of times trans people as a community, we have each other's back without necessarily knowing each other, because it's not about a personal level, it's like just the community of it, and knowing that I feel the exact way, well, not maybe the exact same experience, but we feel a similar way in terms of like dysphoria and gender identity, so we can kind of have each other's backs in a way where we can educate people at the same time, as protecting each other. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll go back in time a little bit, and just ask what it was like to play for ManCity and Man United.
Yeah. Crazy experience. I think when I look back at United, that was probably my best times playing football. It sounds really like cliche and like cringy almost, but it taught me everything I know about myself now. And there's coaches who are probably working in different fields right now and getting on with their lives, but to me, they like made me the player and person I am today, because just things like discipline, walking in, have to shake your coach's hand, like meeting people who, I was a shy kid, I didn't even want to sign for Man United, purely for the fact that I went to the first trial and I was so nervous, like I looked like I'd never played football in my life, and it was against all these people who were in the United kit and they were retrialling or they were already players, and I was thinking, it was like imposter syndrome. I was like, I do not belong here. And again, that's probably about the age that I was starting to already think about, okay, I know that I'm gay, but I don't feel like a girl. So already in them spaces, I was feeling like, oh, I don't belong here. But I kind of pushed myself, and yeah, it was like the best 5 years of football. I'd say I had so many experiences, like playing against Arsenal. I've even got pictures of me playing against Lee Williamson, which is, it's just mad when you look back at like players that, like Ella Toons in the age group below me, played with Katie Zellum for years, like was really close with the whole group, Millie Turner, like there's so many players that I look at now and I think, wow, like you guys are at the forefront of women's football, but there's so many other players underneath that can go, yeah, we were a part of it too. And I think, yeah, that's a crazy kind of thought to acknowledge that we've all played a part in where women's football's got to. But yeah, it was a crazy experience playing for United. And even City, because when I went to City at first, I was kind of on the fringe of training with the first team, playing with the devs squad, But it was when they were transitioning from almost grassroots into WSL, because obviously they got a big like influx of money, so they were able to transition into the WSL. And at that point, I turned up to training one day and you had like Tony Duggan walking, Jill Scott walking, and it was like, I'm training and playing with England players, which again, I look back on and it almost doesn't seem real, like you take things in your stride, and now I'm 26 and I'm like, yeah, women's football's got such a great place, but I look back and go at 17, Kaz, you were in Spain on a pre-season tour playing with England internationals, like that is insane to me. I'm very lucky for where I've got to, which is probably why I stick at it now, regardless of gender or any of it, because I'm like, this has been my life and my identity and part of my community for so many years, and Man United and ManCity were like the foundation to get me to that.
Sorry, that's just wild.
It's mad, that, isn't it? Like, it's crazy. I look back and I'm like, my mum says it all the time. When I got dropped from City, I was like a bit like, obviously I was really down. And like maybe a year later or so, my mum sat me down and was like, how many people can say they've done that? Like, not many. And like, it might not be a big deal to you because I had big aspirations, and when you're a kid and you're at that level, you think, I'm going to be a professional footballer. And then when it doesn't work out, you're like, oh, like it was all for nothing. But my mum's like, look at the experiences you've had. Like, you've played at amazing stadiums, like you played at Premier League stadiums. Like, it's crazy the experiences I have had. And yeah, I've got to be grateful for that. Yeah, football's given me a lot.
Great, I'm really happy for that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just, wow.
Yeah, it's mad.
Not gonna be weird and starstruck.
Yeah.
Okay, this is slightly philosophical and vague, so you can take it however you want. But and also I'm not entirely sure it's a question, so you can just jump in. But there's something very interesting about I guess because even like people who make it to the very top levels and play for like England or for Premier League teams or whatever. I made it sound really dismissive. I didn't mean that. But like football, like at that level lasts for a certain amount of years, and then you've got like a whole bunch of life after that.
Yeah.
And there's something very interesting about, I guess, the nature of sports as something that exists in terms of almost a series of transitions, and only lasts for X amount of time, and then you've got the rest of your life. And in comparison to, like, I think as somebody who's nearly 30, there's something very interesting about being trans and being like, okay, my whole life for the last 4 years or so, actually, 6 years actually, if we count when I like first started thinking about like any kind of physical transition, but like has been around the idea of like, oh, at some point I want to physically transition. I'm in a waiting list. I'm da-da-da. Yeah. And like I'm in the middle of that. But then actually after that, there's like all this more life to happen. Yeah.
As a completely new person.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I don't know. Very philosophical, but not a question. I'm really sorry. I'm just like, I'm very interested in the way that sports kind of is also is not. It has something very trans about it. Yeah. I think women's football in particular it's always been seen as more community based, more inclusive, just through it being more accepted, being gay in general. So with like trans inclusion, it's probably again more accepted than it will be in cis men's sports, because it's been a family orientated space for quite a while. But it's interesting when you said that then, because I just thought back to like, there was a point where I was like, I took a break from football. This season actually, I took a break for like 4 weeks, and I sat with my thoughts and I was like, I have this whole life to live that I feel like is going to start, and this sounds really deep, but like I feel like it's almost going to start when I stop playing football. And it's such a strange, like, dysphoric feeling, but also like it's like nostalgic, where I feel like I owe Cara the chance to play at the level that I always wanted to as a kid. Does that make sense? So when I was playing at United and at City and then I got dropped, it was almost like I'm never going to play at the top level. I'm never going to play at like the top 3. And that was always a thing of all I wanted to do was play in an open age women's team and say like, oh, like, not you've made it, but this is where I wanted to get to. And that was like my personal target. So then when I did come out as non-binary, and I started thinking about it, it was almost like this struggle of
do I quit and live the life I know I want to, in terms of transition, in terms of no one looking at me and seeing a girl or any of that. And then I kind of thought, like, no, like, football's been Cara's life and you owe it to her, because you're going to get her to where she always wanted to be. And now I'm here and I'm playing in tier 3, and I honestly, at one point I was playing in tier 7 and I was enjoying it. I loved my football, but there was still that part of me that was like, you had the potential to play a lot higher than this, and I always wanted to, but something always held me back. And now I feel like I'm at a place where I'm balancing the crisis of wanting to transition into a new life that's after football, and also being like, no, you're going to take Cara as far as she can go, and like, you owe it to your inner child almost. But yeah, that's how it feels, and it's a strange feeling, but it's like one that I'm almost proud of. It's like you're protecting someone who you used to be. And yeah, does that make sense?
It makes so much sense.
Yeah, like...
no, I've gotten very close to my childhood self in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
After being like, no, we're not even thinking about that person. I'm like, actually, like, I was a good kid.
Yeah, like, there's nothing wrong with you. Because I feel like you go through I feel like a lot of trans people relate, it's like a self-reflection but borderline self-hatred, where you kind of start to resent the person that you was because you want to be so far-fetched and removed from that, whereas actually you make peace with it. And now I look back at Cara and I'm like, no, like, she was great. Like, she's still a part of me. Like, you were a nice kid, you were a nice teenager, like, you had friends, you had a whole life, that it's almost a mourning. It's very strange. Like, I don't think a lot of people understand it, but it's like a mourning for someone you used to be. Whereas then I got to a stage where I was like, I don't have to pretend you never existed. I can take you on this journey with me just as who I am now. So I get that about football being transitional, because there's so many parts of it where you like weave in and out of different identities and different people. And obviously playing from such a young age in football, my best friend, who I've been friends with since I went to United at under 13s, and we've been best friends ever since. So she's seen my whole transition as a person through school, like all my different personalities, like your different phases. And she sees me now, and when I come out at first, she was like, I don't get it. And she was like, but you are just Kaz. She's like, you've always just been Kaz. And she was like, that's interesting to me. She was like, 'cause I don't understand it yet. She's like, I will learn to. She's like, but yeah, like, ever since I've known you at football, like, you've just been you. You've not been girl or boy or anything in between, you're just you. And yeah, that's like a good place to get to, where I'm like, no matter what stage I've been at in football or like in life, like the people who've been there and seen it have always just been like, you're always just you.
Going into some things that you mentioned as well, which is to do with like, I guess, well, not really a side note, it's about gender and football still, so we're all on the same plane.
Yeah.
But like, it's interesting that you mentioned like, because you came out as gay, or I don't know if you came out as gay or if you were just like, I'm gay, and people were like just figuring that out, because sometimes I feel like that's the case as well, where you're like, I haven't really come out, but people just seem to know. Alright.
I'm just here now.
But like, and also like playing on girls and women's teams is of course that like, so the girls and women's teams are very gay.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Like in comparison to men's football, where like at the major leagues there's not like an out gay player, it's interesting that women's football seems to have quite naturally grown into a space that potentially, I mean, I'm sure that there are places that suck and whatever, but like is generally considered a safe place to explore sexuality and also gender through that sexuality in a way.
Yeah.
Like I feel like a lot of I say this like there's trans people coming out like left, right, and centre in like women's football, but it does feel like a place where one can like maybe have that exploration more and feel somewhat able to not be worried about how people might react to it. Or
well, that's it. When I came out, I think it was maybe 2 years ago now, but I was in the middle of transitioning teams as well. So it was this thing of, I was in a team where I felt so comfortable and I had loads of really close friends, and I knew that no matter what I said, I was accepted for it. And then I went from that and it was like, oh, like, I can take a breath now, I've come out. And then all of a sudden it was this realisation of you wanted to play at a higher level. And then I transitioned to a new team and I thought, now I've got to do it all over again. Because now I'm going into a team where automatically, and no fault of their own, they don't know you. They will think you're a girl. So I was like, right, I'm going to have to. But obviously with social media, I think a few people already knew of me on that team. So I think I've spoke about this before, but the manager rang me one day and was like, we'd love to sign you. And we had a big chat. And I probably had a perception of middle-aged cis guy, like thinking, not going to understand it, like certain perceptions, like wasn't sure how it would be received. And he rang me and was like, I've got a quick question. And I was like, yeah, okay. And he was like, basically, I've been doing some reading. And I was like, okay. And he was like, I don't want to get anything wrong. And I was like, right. And honestly, I didn't know where he was going with it. I didn't even think in my head he's going to ask me anything. And he went, what, like, why? Like, what's non-binary? Like, tell me about it. Like, because do I need to change any, like, language in training? Do I need to, like, what can I do, basically? And I was like, because I'd never had that conversation before. Because as far as I was aware, I'd come out when I was 11. I didn't really have many conversations because it was just like, yeah, you're gay, that's fine. And then when it got to this point, I was like, oh, someone's actually wanting to create a space where I feel included. And it was such a nice feeling of someone who I didn't expect. Whereas maybe, like, it was judgmental, but if it was a gay woman who was a manager, I might have had a different feeling of, oh, she'll understand. But it was like a nice surprise that he took the time to ring and was like, I want to learn about it before you join the team. And that's not to say people got it right straight away, but it was nice to go into a team thinking, yeah, like, people are going to try. And that's all I've ever really asked. I've never been one to be really strong on, like, no, like, you're a bad person because you misgendered me, or you don't understand and that makes you... I've never been like that. I know that things take time to learn and educate yourself, and as a society, if we're not taught it from young, all of a sudden telling a group of adults who've already established all these beliefs and values something completely new, it's like human nature to reject it or to not understand it. So it was just nice to go into a new team where the manager had already kind of set the tone of, I want to learn and I don't know anything about it, I'm not claiming to understand it, but you tell me if there's anything I can do to make it better. And that was like a nice moment in football that I remember. Like, I remember that conversation, and yeah.
That's really wonderfully proactive.
So I was having this chat with my friend the other day about feminism and intersectionality. And we were just talking about how people often turn around and go, oh, like, it's not that deep. And it's like, no, it is. Like, everything is based upon, like, interweaving with racism, with, like, sexism, misogyny. But when you have this thing of, oh, it's not that deep, like, it doesn't really affect you that much, it's like, no, because you've never had to, like, be victim of a system that is just not for you, because it is made for you. That's the frustrating thing. It's like, no, you wouldn't understand, and you would think, oh, it's not that deep. Why is it that deep that they want to play in sports? It's like, what do you think trans people should do? Just sit around and not do anything they want or have a passion for, just because there's not an option to do it.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't fight for that right to be able to do it. It's crazy.
Just yeah. I've had some conversations as well where I've just been like, oh great, okay, so I have to be super informed on, like, biology, history,
Yes.
like political history and sciences, and just be like, and like sports history and sciences, and just like the whole thing, and you get to ask me really stupid questions because you don't know, you're just like,
and you don't understand,
and you don't understand.
Yeah, there's no point in me going into the biology of it because it wouldn't register. No, you're just going, oh,
yeah, exactly.
It's a man, it's a woman, like.
But yeah, I do think there's like, I don't want to get too deep into this because I think in a lot of ways the obsession with testosterone is it's kind of cis people's obsession. But obviously it does affect a whole bunch of us for various reasons, whether it is because we were assigned male at birth and so possibly have more testosterone in our systems, or if we want to take testosterone, or if we're intersex. In in terms of like as a question as well, like, but not phrase as a question. I'm doing a lot of these.
I like these.
Where it's like you should be allowed to take testosterone and still play on whatever team it is that you want to be playing on. It will change your body in some ways, but like a cis guy who hasn't had football training is not going to be an amazing footballer compared to you who's had the training. That's not how it works. And so I guess the comparison of like cis people's obsession with testosterone as the be all end all like indicator of sports versus maybe like, all right, well, what are the conversations that we actually should be having about access? So like, where do you actually, there's a question. Hey, like, where do you think that the conversation should be? I've mentioned access, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like access specifically. But yeah, I've mentioned access now, but you don't have to.
It's interesting.
It's very broad. I know. I'm putting you on.
No, it's alright. To be fair, I was on a panel discussion not long ago where someone who was a lecturer at uni was studying this, and they were looking at, I think it was like people who'd medically transitioned and how the level of testosterone affected sports, and the results, even I was surprised at, like the comparability, it wasn't that much, like it wasn't that much difference compared to across the board. It's more a case of like individually, some people are more talented, some people can catch a ball when they're like 3, some people struggle, like some people do maths, like we've all got different like abilities, but people seem very obsessed with going like, oh well, professional sport, and it's like there's a lot of other avenues than just like professional sport and grassroots. Like there's a whole different spectrum of things that people can do and get involved in, and I think people do just kind of cherry pick what they want out the conversation, and at the minute testosterone is like the key indicator, which it'd take a little bit of research from someone's point and they'd see that it's not the only indicator. But I just think some people don't want to learn, so if it's easy for them to pick out one thing and go, this is why you shouldn't play, then if enough people hop on that, then it becomes the truth. Whereas again, all it takes is a little bit of research to find out that there's a lot more factors that can affect trans inclusion, and it's, on one hand, like, it's so serious, but on the other hand, it's not. Like, when you look at a broad spectrum, like a worldly view, a spiritual view, like, it's a game. Like, we all play, we all start playing for some sort of enjoyment. Like, it's almost like saying, how far does it go? Do you start doing it with chefs? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, people who just enjoy cooking, it's like, oh, you'd be better because you're biologically stronger. It's crazy to me, because I'm like, well, how far does it go until it's, everything has to be this really serious topic? Whereas actually, we all play sports because we enjoy it. Can that not be the indicator that you get involved in a sport because you enjoy it at the level you enjoy it at? And there should be an option for you to go in at that level. That's kind of my opinion on it, but it's never really seen that way, unfortunately. A lot of people say facts over feelings, but I read something a while ago and it's always stuck with me, which is compassion over comprehension. So you can not understand something, but you can still have compassion for that person and their lived experience compared to, oh, this is a fact. Because if your fact is destroying or upsetting someone or offending someone else, you've got to balance up your compassion there, like which one's more important to you, being right or being a nice person and including everyone. And that's what it comes down to.
Which also, I often feel like when people do the facts over feelings thing, that actually what they're saying is, I'm speaking in a calm voice and you're upset because this affects you personally, so I've won.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not how facts work.
I have no personal tie to this, so I have no emotion behind it, so I can just speak to you like a robot. But for you, it's affecting you, so how dare you be annoyed? Like, I'm gonna be.
Like, maybe you don't have facts, maybe you're just kind of a dick.
Yeah.
Like, maybe this is just like schoolyard bullying, actually.
Yeah. And when you said about banging on the drum, it's like they'll bang on it, and eventually after being so understanding and so willing to educate, we then go, and they go, see, why are you mad? And it's like, I've tried to talk to you. We've tried to have this conversation for years, and now all of a sudden you bash, and we might snap back, and all of a sudden it's, see, there's an agenda, and it's like...
And it's so weirdly predictable as well. Sorry, I know this is also like going on around, but like, it's so predictable as well, because like, it's like, that's what you said about literally every other marginalised group that's ever gotten angry.
Yep, every single one.
Before I ask a slightly larger question, I need to ask a question that I should have asked like way at the beginning, which is what position you play.
Oh, I'm a midfielder. So to be fair, in the past few years, I started off as a holding midfielder, quite defensive, and then I don't know why, but I started just progressively like moving up the pitch. So I went a bit more attacking, and then this season at one point I played in striker, which was completely new to me. But yeah, I'm back in my position now, hopefully as a holding midfielder, which is it's nice to be back in. Less running for me. Yeah, I get to sit back now. Yeah.
Because midfielder is fucking exhausting.
Oh yeah, literally. Anything that goes wrong or right, it's probably your fault.
I was invited to train yesterday. I was really predictable yesterday. I went to the football museum, I went to Canal Street, and then I went to football training.
Oh, you'd never been to Canal Street?
I've never been to Canal Street. I didn't manage to do much more than just like walk up and down it, because I didn't have time to go in anywhere or like check anything out really. So I was just like, ooh, rainbow flags, great.
That's mad.
And then I had to go. So I should really come back for like a proper something. Yeah. Just to hang out rather than to run about and have things I do.
Just be like, whoa, flags everywhere.
Yeah, just like, hey, okay, there's flags everywhere. Well, I know where I am now. I went to football training because the other person I'm going to go talk to today was like, you can come to football training if you want. And I was like, great, because I've only been to one, like I've been to training, I went to like a test training a month ago, but I'm not a woman and non-binary type of person, so I'm still like poking around and looking. It was a really nice training, but then I went yesterday and somehow I ended up in striker because they were like, alright, everybody like organise yourselves into defence and midfield and striker. Nobody was on striker, so I was like, I guess
I'll do it.
I'll do that. And actually I quite enjoyed it. I was like, usually I think of myself as defence just because I feel slightly stressed out about like about the ball like coming back that way, and you were like way up the other side. But actually, I was like, if the ball's down there, then I can just like do a chill sort of little walk halfway down the pitch without having to like run all the way down and then run all the way forwards again. It was actually quite nice. Again, this stuff that I'm just like them. It's about stuff that they obsess about, and I think it's interesting because it seems like there's like now a sudden interest in like women in sport and protecting women and girls in sport, which is entirely like made up and stuff. Yeah. And again, very interesting that I got to see some of that in the football museum, because like it does not seem like there was that concern when women were actually we're pretty good players and like you'd like to watch us play, but suddenly we're not allowed to. And I you know, there's still that like segregation in terms of like who gets like more funding, who gets more like support and sponsorship and all that kind of thing, which was what I've forgotten her name right now, but the one commentator during the Germany-England match, was that just last year? I think that was just last year. She kind of went off about, because England won, and she was like, nobody gets to tell you that women's football is not great. After all these years of being, and I was like, you've been through it, you deserve this.
Yeah, you tell them.
So I'm interested as well in like, if people were genuinely concerned about like women's football, which is where you've been playing, what do you see as like the things that like people ought to be caring about? This is slightly aside from being trans, I guess, but you can if there's anything related to like trans inclusion in that.
I think people use the excuse quite a bit in terms of whether it's women in sport, like trans inclusion in sport, and they often that's the only time they'll have an opinion. Whereas in my head, I say, okay, well, what are you doing for women's rights? What are you doing for trans rights? If you care so much about it, or I've seen some people say, you know, sure, you've probably heard it before, like, oh, mental illness, oh, you shouldn't be around this and you shouldn't be around that. And I think, so if that's your opinion, what are you doing to better it? What are you doing to help it? And ultimately, people only get involved in the conversation to take something away from it rather than give to it. Does that make sense? I think if you're going to have an opinion about it, also have an opinion on how to make it better. Don't just come in and say this is wrong, or I don't like this, or I don't agree with this. If you don't like something, you don't have to watch it. You don't have to invest in it, but there is people who are willing to do that. And especially in the women's game, I think from where it was, even like 10 years ago, to where it is now, it's really hard for people to say, oh, no one cares about women's football, like, because they do. Because in the amount of time that, if you put it on a timeline, that men's football has been massive, and then you look at the minute scale of when women's football started being big, from where it's come, that proves that in another 10 years, in another 20 years, it could be as big or bigger than men's football. But I don't think that's a conversation that people want to have, because of society that we're in. It's very patriarchal. Like, people don't want to admit that women are on a level playing field. And I think because people's opinions are only just starting to appreciate women for being women and not seeing them as something to be used or objectified or looked at, and now we're just seeing, oh, women's footballers, or like women in the army, or anything, whatever it might be, people are only just starting, well, not people, I say that quite broadly, but people with certain opinions are only starting to see women as equal, or seen as women as deserving of that. So as frustrating as it is, I also have to understand that if that's as far as we've got to now, trans inclusion is going to come under that, which is super annoying and frustrating, but that's how it's going to be, because people only like to learn one thing at once. And it's like that cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Like, people get told something and it's like, no, I don't agree with that, like, I don't understand that, that doesn't make sense to me, so it doesn't make it real. And I just think women's football is going to get to where it's going to get to, and women in sport are going to get to where they get to. And when that happens, I'm hoping that the main point of conversation then dips down and turns into trans inclusion and pushes that up to the same level that it deserves to be. But it's a frustrating, like, balance of knowing that we shouldn't have to wait for trans inclusion, we shouldn't have to wait for women's sports to get to where it's get to, we shouldn't have to wait for the funding, for the opportunities. But that's where individuals, not even like myself, because I'm just one person, like, I don't really have that much of an impact, but if you look at the Lionesses, what they did for women's football, that just proved that individually we do all have like a duty and a responsibility to speak out and to push things that we care about, and that's where as a group it's then going to get to where it needs to be. And I think the same way like the Lionesses did it with women's football, trans people can do it with trans inclusion. Like, people aren't going to agree with it, but it doesn't mean we're not going to stop talking about it. And eventually you will understand, because that's what every minority in history has gotten their rights from and gotten to an equal playing field because of, is because they didn't show up and they said, no, we're not going to go away, we're going to keep talking about it, we're going to keep educating, we're going to keep being here and existing in this space until you make a space for us. And that's ultimately what I think we need to do. And I'm glad that women's sports starting to do that. It's almost saying like, no, we're not going to go away. But I think, sorry, I'm going off on one now. But looking back on women's sports, it's almost like women have played in football and had no refunding, no resources, no funding, hand-me-down kits from the men, like no lights on the pitches, playing in the dark. Like, being in women's football, I've experienced that. So we did that for free, we did it with no thanks, we did it with no support, and if anything, did it with retaliation and people telling us we shouldn't do it. So what makes people think that we're not going to do it now it's getting to where it needs to be? And again, the same with trans inclusion in sports. Like, we're already taking backlash, already taken people telling us we shouldn't be here, so it makes no difference because we're here anyway, and we're going to continue to do so. hopefully that will make things and push it in a more progressive direction.
That was amazing.
Thanks.
That was
I really went off on one, and I was like,
no,
up.
You're good. You're so good. That was great. That really, like, I'm gonna use that as a headline.
Yeah.
No,
I had that in my head. Then I was like, gotta get this out.
No, it's so good. It's so
Yeah.
right, and also like kind of like actually I think one can regardless of what one's gender is, I think as a trans person one can take some one can take heart from what's happened in women's sports, like from where it's been, and in a lot of sports, I think probably almost every sport, from where it's been to where it is now, and to where it's presumably continue to go. So in a sort of this one's broad as well. I'm gonna throw it at you and we'll see what happens. Basically, like because you mentioned taking away from a conversation, and I thought that was very interesting. I was wondering about like if one takes away the whole like, oh, but if trans people are in a space, then we have to think about this and that and blah 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 blah. Like, what do you think trans people add to the space? Like, what is it that trans people make better? What do we do?
Yeah. You just twig something in my head. I went for food the other day, and I remember a lot of stuff on social media a while ago and in like news outlets and on the news of people talking about gender neutral bathrooms, and it was such a big conversation, and it was as if like we'd have to change all of society and it would cost so much more money and blah, blah, blah. And then I went for food, and my friend came out and was like, go look at the toilets. So I looked at the toilets, and it was as simple as man, woman, for everyone, kids, disability, and it was like, that's all it needs. Like, it doesn't need to be non-binary person, trans woman, cis man. Like, it doesn't need all these different categories. It's just, if you want to use this one, it's for everyone, and that's all like trans people have asked for. But I think in terms of what trans people add, this is gonna get deep, but I think it's like a rejection of the binary in general, and it's the authenticity to live and express yourself in a way that other people are afraid to. And I actually think on a more like philosophical, spiritual level, that's why trans people get so much backlash and hate, is because people haven't looked at the self-hate within themselves first, and the suppression of their own femininity, their own masculinity. And when you do that to yourself, of course then you're going to project it onto someone else, because you haven't been able to express yourself the way you really want to. And I really do believe that, because I think if we were born in a society that accepted that boys don't have to wear blue, girls don't have to wear pink, makeup doesn't have a gender, clothes don't have a gender, if we were brought up this way, everyone would just be a human, regardless of gender. Yeah, we need it for certain things and it's important for identity, but ultimately people would express themselves how they want to. And I do think that trans people are adding that into the conversation now, where we're saying we reject that. We don't fit into a box. We might not fit into your label, but we're still here. And that scares some people. But I do think eventually people will start appreciating the rawness and genuinity and authenticity of trans people in spaces, going, you can do that as well. Like, we're not saying, oh, men, we don't want masculinity anymore. We're saying you can be masculine, you can also cry. You can be feminine, you can also dress butch. Like, it's everything. We're saying everything can be included and everything is okay. It just depends on how you want to express yourself. And like I say, I think once people start suppressing that in themselves, that's when they start projecting it onto other people. So I think trans people in spaces is a good thing, because we're showing people that you can be who you want to be and you don't have to be who society tells you to be. Does that make sense?
That's perfect. That's amazing. You're very good at this.
Thank you.
I don't know if you were wondering or whatever, but I was just like, no, you're doing great.
It's like when we're having a conversation, I'm thinking, am I just going on myself? Am I even making sense? I think it's interesting that a lot of the times people use the argument that women aren't as good as men, or it's not as entertaining to watch. And I think they need to realise that it's a different game, it's a different sport. But also, if that's people's opinions of it, that you shouldn't play something because you're not good at it, then does that mean that only professional sport should exist? grassroots shouldn't exist. You shouldn't paint because you enjoy painting. You shouldn't cook because you enjoy cook. You shouldn't play football because you enjoy it. You need to be good at something in order to be acknowledged for it. And that's a crazy concept to me, because the guys who play five-a-side on a Friday night, I don't see anyone turning around saying you shouldn't play, or the little girls after school playing rugby, like no one's, you shouldn't play. Like it shouldn't be a case of that. Like if you enjoy something, you should be able to do it. But no, I just think it's interesting that people often use that argument of, oh, women aren't as good as men, and it's like, so even if that's true, which in my opinion is not, it's different, and that's probably the change of language that we need to start recognising. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. It's a different game, it's a different sport. Like, it needs to be recognised in its own right, the same way everything else is. Because it's funny, a lot of the, well, no, we like to say they, but a lot of the people who have these opinions are the same people who will go down to the five-a-side on a Friday night and play. Does that mean you shouldn't, because you're not as good as the people playing in the Premier League? No, does it heck? It's personal preference. But yeah, I just find it interesting that that's often a big argument against women's sports, the trans inclusion, whatever the argument is. It's going to affect it in this way, and it's like, well, maybe the way it's always been done isn't the best, most efficient way to do it.
We were also talking about the very natural progression that things are taking, both within women's football, and how that adds. I mean, because I think that's very interesting as well, because people.
I never know what to say, because you say people, and people are like, not everyone has these opinions. I'm like, I know, but it's just the general consensus of people.
People who have certain opinions, which also always sounds a bit wishy-washy, but whatever. Will kind of try to pit women's sport and women's rights anyway and trans rights, but in the microcosm of it, they'll try to pit women's sports against trans inclusion sports, when actually it's very interesting. What you're saying is they're kind of taking a very parallel path, and even that women's sports can also even be seen as almost like a lighthouse beam for what trans rights and sports can become.
I think it's it translates a lot into just the way people's brains work in society in general, because you've got people who say oh, I'm going to stay on this side and I want equality for everyone. But it's interesting, when certain people get that equality, they want privilege, not equality. And I think that's the kind of laying thing, is when people do get that equality, some women, with the trans inclusion stuff, then turn around and go, oh, we don't want trans people in our spaces. But you're doing the same thing as the men who said we don't want women in our spaces. You're doing the same thing as white people who say we don't want black people in our spaces. Or, we're doing the whole same thing. And at some point, because it happens, obviously in the LGBTQ plus community, you have gay people who are transphobic, you have lesbians who don't like gay men. It's such a strange concept to me, because I'm we're all fighting the same fight, we're all in the same battle, and if anything, if you think by accommodating and joining the side of privilege is going to somehow help you, it's not. And I think people need to realise that, because I've noticed that with a few women in sports have personally we've had conversations about it, and it's kind of been a case of, well, if this happens, then that's going to take away from me. And I'll go, but you fight for your right that you're not taking anything away from men by being in a women's sport. I was so you have to apply the same logic, because otherwise you don't want equality, you want privilege. And I think that's the difference, is you need to recognise that as to what you're actually fighting for. Do you want to just be in that position of power with the rest of the people? Because eventually it'll filter down, and they'll still come to you, and at some point you'll always be the opposite side. So it's just what side of history you want to be on, if you want to put it that way. Do you want to be on the side that says, when things got difficult, I turned to the person who is next in line and said, I don't want you in my space? Or were you the person to say, oh yeah, come into my space, because I'm not going to be like the person who did it to me? But that's a bit of human nature, isn't it? We want community, we want tribes, we want groups, but alongside that comes segregation, and you don't fit in with our group, so I don't want you in it. Whereas the sooner I realise we're all just here on this planet doing whatever we're doing. Like, we are just all human. I think that's where spirituality comes into it a little bit with me, especially with like gender and stuff. I think I owe a lot of my gender identity to the fact that I've always been interested in spirituality, and I always just saw myself as a human or as some form of energy at some point. And because of that, I realised that all these like superficial labels that were assigned to me weren't actually me. They were just a part of me. And it's the same thing now. Like, there's a big conversation around gender identity, but when I speak to people, a big thing is it's not my only part of me. Like, I'm a whole human without that. And yeah, it happens a lot in my day-to-day job, in my 9 to 5. It happens quite a lot, which I find interesting. Is I work in quite a stereotypical male-dominated space. It's with a lot of tradesmen. So when I speak to them, I have my pronouns on my name badge, and a few of them notice, a few of them don't. But when they do, they're very outspoken. They're very confident, and they'll say like, "Oh, what's that?" And they'll ask questions, and it might not always be in the most polite way. But I also understand sometimes. I think, you're just a product of how you've been brought up. You're curious. You don't understand it. But for them to look at someone and go, "Oh, I see you every day, and I actually like you as a person," and then they find out about the gender identity, I can see this like internal conflict of, oh, that goes against what I believe. I don't want to like you now, but you've already established it as a person, we get on, and you do like me. And I think that's probably where people need to get to, is instead of having an opinion on the label, have an opinion on the person. There's a lot of gay people who are not nice people. There's a lot of cis people who are lovely. Like, it's not about the label or the opinion on someone's identity, it's the individual and whether they're a nice person.
That's cool. Do you feel like there's something around sports and spirituality as well that like relates in like a okay, so for me, like, I feel like parts of me, like the fact that I'm this, like, I relate to gender in this way, that relates to sexuality this way, my brain is an ADHD brain, I'm a spiritual person as well, like all these things all like bleed into each other. So I was just wondering whether there was any like bleed through between like how you relate to yourself as a sports player, like a football player, and how you relate to your gender and spirituality.
I think see, there's so many like branches right now in my head, like which way to go down. I think in football is the time where all the different aspects of myself seem to like come together, where I feel like I can be myself, and I'm being my true self, and I'm being authentic to myself. And I think people who aren't involved in sport might not understand that, because they might get it from their jobs or their career or their day-to-day or spending time with family, whereas I get that from football. There's obviously different aspects of yourself that you portray to the world, whether it's in a professional setting or whatever it might be, but I think when I'm playing football, like you say, it bleeds into one, where I'm like, like, this is home, like, this is who I am, which is probably why I've had such a passion for it, and probably why, I don't want to say like despite not being able to transition, it's somehow holding me back, but that's probably why, because of the love and the passion I have for it, and I know that that's when I feel my most genuine and my most authentic. That's why I don't want to leave the space just yet, even though it doesn't really tie in with my gender identity, if that makes sense. Because I think I mentioned before, like, it does feel like a community and a space and a family that I've had since before I can remember. Like, so going back to people who've said to me previously, well, you shouldn't play women's football. Now that you've come out, you don't deserve to be in this space. And my argument to that is, like, this is my community at the same time. Like, women's football is my community. And whether that changes in a few years when I stop playing, or whether I go down coaching or whatever it might be, at some point I think I do want to merge my gender identity with football in a different way, whether it is going down coaching and trying to get more queer, gender non-conforming people into football from a younger age. Then that might be like a thought or an idea that comes to me at a later date, but yeah, I think for now it's just a place where I feel most comfortable in myself. And yeah.
Also, yeah, I was actually going to ask about that as well. Like at one point when you transition, whether like football will still have part of what that would be. And
yeah, I definitely think so. Because I think kids are so, like, kids' brains are like sponges, aren't they? So I do have the opinion, and some people will disagree, some people might agree, but I think the earlier you can educate kids on gender identity, the better. Because I know for me, it would have saved a whole lot of dysphoria, confusion, identity crisis if way back when it's funny little memories that come back to you. But I remember being at a family barbecue and it was boys' table, girls' table, and it was like, go sit down. And I remember as a kid genuinely being so confused by that question. Like, if I'd have known through school or through teaching or whatever it might be that there isn't this segregation in gender, like, it's a spectrum, and if you don't feel like you fit, you can play with the boys, you can play with the girls, you can merge in whatever way you see fit. I think it would have saved a lot of like conflict growing up. So that's what I think. If I come out of football, I would potentially want to go down an avenue where I can be that person to coach kids who may be thinking, oh, I don't fit in this space, or I don't understand where I'm meant to fit, so I just won't play football, or I just won't play sport. And I do think kids are a lot more understandable, and they get it a little more. I have a neighbour who, lovely kid, he's a lovely kid, but him and his sister came to the door not long ago. I think it was for Halloween. They were giving me like a Halloween gift, and I remember they had a few other kids with them, and I was at the top of the stairs, and I could hear them through the door, and one of them said like, oh, like, what's her name? And then Jake went, no, it's they, like, they're non-binary or something. And I could hear this conversation, and I was like, it's so innocent, but it's so accepting. Like, as a kid, you don't fully understand, but even you could acknowledge that. And I think when I look at that, I think, yeah, like, when I come out of football, if I could be some sort of, like, role model, I don't really like using that word, but if I could be someone who could teach in some way, whether it is in football, whether it is in sport, I just think I want to be the person to kind of educate and teach through my own experiences. Being a kid who didn't know who I was, but knowing that kids do understand and you can be taught from young what it means to be a person and different parts of identity. So hopefully that is an avenue I can go down after football.
Yeah. I do know for a fact, by the way, that there is at least one trans guy who coaches kids.
Really?
I talked with him. And he's based in Leeds.
No way, that's
yeah.
it.
He's 38, so...
Right.
So, like, yeah, that's totally a thing that one can do.
Yeah, I like that.
So, that's just apropos what you were saying as well.
Yeah, because I've coached, like, alongside football, and I did a lot of, like, one-to-one training, so a lot of the time you'll build, like, rapport and a relationship with a parent and a kid, and, like, it's great for them to see you in a space where they trust you to educate and teach their kid, but also they get to know you and the parents get to know you as a person as well. And that was always an interesting conversation, because if I had to say, like, oh, by the way, like, I'm not a girl, I know you might presume I am, but da-da-da, and it's always good to take the tiny opportunities to just educate people, and I think that's all it needs. It's like, it's just a little drip feed, isn't it, to help people understand.
I think it's interesting as well. I mean, I don't know what is busy with work, but just in terms of football, like, I think the first thing that people might, or like what I would think would be like football player. Yeah. Which isn't gendered either. Yeah. But like, there's football player, and then, you know, it might be like, oh yeah, you play football, that's really cool, you can bond over that, and then it's like, oh, okay, I've just bonded with this person is non-binary. Maybe I'll go and educate myself on that. Who knows? Yeah. I just wanted to ask whether you have like an anecdote that you would like to talk about that has to do with a time you played. It doesn't have to actually be necessarily when you were playing. Some of the stories I've gotten have been like, this is related to football, but I wasn't actually playing at the time. But yeah, just like that was fun or interesting or made you realise something or what have you.
God, I have so many. I was thinking this morning.
You can do more as well if you want. Like, okay. I'm so up for it. Like, go for
it. This is such a random, like, it was like a lesson in this, like, self-acceptance, like, moment. But it's funny to me because it doesn't seem like the biggest milestone, but it's just like a moment that, like, I remember. So I think it was last season, and I'd obviously played against certain players, played against certain teams, but we got the chance to play in a Premier League stadium, and there was a picture where I'm, like, looking up at the stadium. And I remember looking back at that picture, and I remember in my head, like, everyone's obviously just like, wow, this is crazy. And I remember looking, being like, oh, like, 12-year-old Cara, like, would be so proud of me right now. And I remember tweeting after and being like, the little kid in me would be so proud that we are stood here in a Premier League stadium. And just, like, I took it all in, and I was like, wow, I'm here. And then in the first 30 seconds of that game, I scored an own goal. But it made me laugh because, like, after the game, like, I was sat there and I was like, it was like this moment of, like, yeah, like, on one hand it was such, like, a big, oh yes, and then on the other hand I was like, oh, it's just any other day, it's just any other game, but, like, this is, like, such a, it was just a funny moment in football where before the game I was really, like, romanticising it in my head. I was like, oh my God, I'm here, like, I've done it, I've done this for myself, like, little Cara would be so proud. And then I scored no goal, and I remember doing it, and, like, as much as I was fuming at the time, I remember having a little giggle to myself, like, this is so funny, like, this was supposed to be such, like, a milestone for you, and I've ruined it, sorry. Like, it just made me laugh. But yeah, there's been a few times like that. I played in the FA Cup against Aston Villa last season, which was crazy, because, like, you're playing against, like, Rachel Daly, like, got a Euros medal, like, do you know what I mean? Like, when I actually deeped it, I was thinking, wow, like, I've just played against someone who won the Euros, like, playing against some of the best players in the country. Yeah, that was an insane moment. And again, it just makes me look back at where I was, and I was so disheartened that I didn't think I was gonna, like, make it in football, and now I'm like, oh, like, the journey's been worth it. And it makes me happy because at one point not long ago I was so close to giving it up, because in my head I was like, I don't want to do this anymore, purely off the fact that I feel like there's, like you said before, there's a whole nother life that you feel like you have the potential to lead, and this was a thing that I saw as holding me back from it. But actually now I'm like, nah, I'm embracing it, and I'm bringing my identity into it, rather than taking it away and saying I can't do both, because I can do both. And maybe if I stay in this space long enough, I can make some sort of change with gender non-conforming people in football. And if anything, I think I'm proof that it doesn't really change anything. Like, it doesn't change anything in the sport. Like, I've always played, I've always been here. Just because I figured out my identity doesn't mean that now I shouldn't be in the sport or shouldn't be included. And I think that goes for a lot of people. So maybe if there is someone who's thinking, oh, I don't want to play, or if I come out that means I need to leave my team, or my team won't understand, sometimes you've got to just endure and say, I'm here whether you like it or not. Luckily I've had a really good experience in football, and I have so many, like, amazing memories and experiences that I can look back on, and I'm so grateful for that. And yeah, I owe that to women's football, which has always been an inclusive space to me. So yeah, I'm grateful for that. Wouldn't change it either.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of saying something that you have already said a few times, but I'm just gonna ask it as, like, as its own question, because you've incorporated it into some of the other things you're saying. But do you feel like, and it's kind of obvious, but do you feel like having been able to embrace your identity and having been able to be open with that, has that changed how you come into the game? Not necessarily, like, whether you're a better player or a worse player, just how your like feelings about coming into like training, playing a match, being around other footballers, etc.
Interesting, because I didn't. There's things that you don't realise until you've done them, and then you look back and in hindsight you go, that's why. And I struggled a lot with body image, ironically. But for me it came out in like physically being more overweight than I probably should have been as a footballer, and that ultimately was one of the reasons I got dropped from City, because I wasn't taking nutrition seriously and I gained a bit of weight. And at that time I was like, I didn't understand why I didn't like my body so much, and it was just, I feel like I hid it in food and eating and not taking football serious, and it was almost like this strange self-sabotage of I know what I want to look like, but I don't like what I see in the mirror anyway, so I just kind of gorged and I binge it. And looking back now, friends and family, we go like, we didn't realise you were quite big at that age. And then as I was stepping into like feeling more comfortable in who I was, I lost a lot of the weight. And this was before I'd come out. This was just when I was internally realising, I don't think I'm a girl. And it was like this like relief. And when that happened, everything else started falling into place. I started realising like, I want to treat my body better, I want to eat better, I want to look better. And now I'm in a position where physically, there might be things that still give me a bit of dysphoria or whatever it might be, but I feel now that once I accepted myself, I also accepted the body that I was in, and that helped me in football, because that's when I started feeling like I owed it to myself to get to a certain level. And that was when I started really coming into football and coming into my own, was when I did lose the weight and I did start actually taking it a bit more serious and saying, no, like, you deserve this, but you have to accept your body and you have to treat your body better in order to get there. And for a lot of people, they wouldn't see that as such like a deep thing, but I think when you struggle with gender identity, dysphoria is such a big thing. Like looking in the mirror and not liking what you see and not understanding, because it doesn't like portray who you feel on the inside. But yeah, getting to a stage now where I'm like, I'm accepting of the body I'm in for now. And again, losing that weight and starting to accept myself, it was like a steady journey of, now I look back and go, I was starting to figure out who I was around about that time, and that made me want to start treating myself better. Whereas because I had this like internal self-hate and I didn't understand myself, that's what I projected to the world, which wasn't me putting my best foot forward. But I didn't realise that at the time. I didn't realise I was struggling with gender identity until I look back now and go, it's like parallel, it lines up. It's interesting to look back on that kind of went hand in hand with me feeling more comfortable in football. That also aligned with feeling more comfortable in myself.
In terms of like teams, like I don't know if it would be in the future or what it would be, but would you be like, are you like really happy being in just women's spaces in football, or say like in the future, maybe after you've like finished your professional career, like whether you'd be like interested in like a mixed space or predominantly trans space, or I don't know, like I keep being like, if cis men knew how to be trans inclusive, which is really rude of me maybe, but
nobody is. It's true, because I feel like a lot of the time as well, it's like if people want to get involved in it, and this is just a side note, but if people want to get involved in it, it's almost like even trans guys, it's not necessarily forced, but it's almost like you have to then go into a non-binary or women's space, and it's like, it's great that it's inclusive, but it might not be their space. Like if you identify as a guy, it's still almost like saying, oh yeah, go with the women and non-binary people, and it's like, that's not your space. You don't want to, do you know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? And I think it's a bit, I don't know, not patronising, but it's difficult. If it was a bit more inclusive, if men's spaces were a bit more inclusive, it'd allow trans men to go into those spaces and be accepted, rather than being shunned to the side and said, well, there's these, be grateful that there's this mixed team. And it's like, but they might not identify with non-binary and like trans women. It might not be their space. That's the difficulty, isn't it? But again, that does start from patriarchy. It starts from the men, and you have the resources, you have the opportunities, so in a way you do have the responsibility to open the door. Yeah, which is annoying. It's almost like I've been gay and identified as a girl longer than I have been non-binary, so it's almost that off balance of I've been in this environment with this community, which, if I'm honest, I don't attach it. When I say I'm like, because I will gladly say that, oh, I'm a women's footballer, and then people might get a bit confused and they're like, but you don't identify as a woman and you don't identify as a girl, and like, how does that balance off? And I'm like, because I've always been in this environment and this is my home, if you want to call it that. Yeah, it's a tough one, because I have this emotional attachment through being gay. Like, I wanted to find a space where, growing up in school, all my friends were straight. I never really had a group of people where I could identify with them on that level, and it is quite isolating because you have your friends and you have things in common, but you don't have that kind of underlying common denominator of like, you understand what I'm going through. So when I first joined City and the whole team were openly gay, it was this thing of like, oh, like, you guys get me, like, you understand who I am. And that's probably why I have this emotional attachment to women's football and women's spaces more than men's. Same with like using toilets. Like, I would feel safer going into that because I was assigned female at birth, and I feel more comfortable around women. For whatever reason, it's because I've been around girls and women my whole life in football, and that's where I've kind of found myself and found my own identity separate from gender. So it's not so much of a case of women's football because I feel feminine or I feel like a woman. It's not that. It's that's been my life, and if anything, I feel as deserving to be in that space as anyone else because I've given a lot to it. And we've all had our roles in helping women's football grow, and just because I've gone on a journey of like self-reflection and understanding who I am in terms of identity and gender doesn't take away the fact that I've also helped that grow too. So yeah, I think I have an emotional attachment to it, which I don't think is anything to take away from me, if I'm honest. Yeah.
And I think as well, it's another thing that I think is really interesting in terms of trans people. Let's say football because of the microcosm of it, because we're talking about football, but like as a whole as well. But like trans people in football is like, well, it's not always as simple as being like, oh, I identify as non-binary, so let's make a non-binary league, or like, oh, I identify as a trans woman, so it could be that one identifies as a trans woman and then wants to go play on a women's team, but it could be that actually you came out as a trans woman on this gay men's team and you want to stay on that team or whatever. The other way around. And like a lot of the people I've talked to really like women non-binary teams. Some of the people I've talked to are like, absolutely not, that's not what I want. And so it's an interesting like question of like, well, how do we open up the space so that people can like be in the different spaces that we add to. I think any of these spaces we add to. Like,
exactly. That's the thing though, isn't it, is I don't want to come... I never wanted to come across that I stayed in this space because I didn't want to help another space grow in terms of non-binary or like any other type of team. It's just, there's obviously the bigger picture of gender identity, and then there's the fact that you're just an individual footballer. And as an individual footballer, if I take myself out of women's football, I have played at a certain level that I could not then hop into in terms of a like inclusive team or a mixed team. It just wouldn't work. So it's not always as simple as, oh, we'll just go and make an own league or go and do this. Like, you need resources, you need funding, you need money, you need financial backing, you need backing from the higher ups and the people in power to allow you to play in that space. Like, it's not just as simple as saying, oh, I identify like this, so I'm going to go and play in a team, because not in a like big-headed way, but if I took myself out of a space and just went in and was like, yeah, I'm going to play at this grassroots team, like, that wouldn't also be fair in a way, because it's not fair on anyone. They might be there for completely different reasons. I play football, yes, to enjoy it, but I'm competitive, I want to win, I want it to play at the highest level. For someone who's going to have community and to enjoy their Thursday night, if I went in and was all like, like, I want these high standards, and it wouldn't match. So that's another conversation for, you know, like the organisations to not just say it's either grassroots or pro. There's got to be a middle ground of like, you have to have a space for everyone, where everyone feels included.
At first I was thinking sort of broadly about what philosophy of like trans philosophy one might take into football, but actually, if we're being more specific, what is it that you really love getting out of football?
Oh, so many things. So many things. It's funny because me and my friend have this conversation a lot about, a lot of the time people have a certain opinion on women's football, and if anything, we should be praised for being in a space where there isn't as much funding, people don't seem to want to accept it as much, but we do it despite that. We do it because we love it, but at the same time we laugh about the fact we've done it for so long, it's become part of a routine. So whether I enjoy it or hate it, I've had seasons I have hated and it's not been enjoyable at all. I've had seasons where it's been the best moments of my life. It's like a part of my identity now. So as much as like you get so much from it, I always look back and think, yeah, it's just a part of who I am now. I couldn't imagine a day where I didn't have football training or I didn't have a game on a weekend, because it's just become a part of my life as much as waking up and eating breakfast is. But I think the main thing is that like sense of like family and community, and unless you're involved in it, people probably wouldn't understand why, but you spend so much time with these people, you bond with these people, and if anything it teaches you like life lessons. Like I might be in a team and imagine you've got a squad of 20 people, all different personalities, different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures, different skin colour, like there's so many different things, and when you step on that pitch, it doesn't matter whether I like you, it doesn't matter whether I'm your best friend, like I'll have your back in those 90 minutes on that pitch. And I think it's a very special feeling of like coming together with a group, and it's like finding like your tribe. And again, I've always spoke about this in terms of like human nature. We strive for community, we strive for a group, and that's a lot of the time why we end up putting people in boxes and categories. But when we use it in the right way, and I think football is one of the best examples, is you find a group of people from all these different backgrounds who don't know each other, they come together at whatever point in their life, and then some of these people are people that I'll never not speak to, people that I'll invite to my wedding, like, and I might have met them 5 years ago and spent one season with them, but just in that one season we had experiences that I'll remember until like the day I die, and that's such a special feeling. And I know that a lot of footballers, well, majority of footballers will experience that. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I get out of it, community.
That's amazing. How many teams have you been with, first of all?
Oh,
damn. I don't know.
Right. So I was at United City, and then I went to Sheffield FC. Then I went to FC United. Then I went to Brighouse. Huddersfield. I was at Fylde as well last season. So 7.
Just like
God, I'm just making my way around the league at this point. Like before I turn 30, I'm just gonna try and tick off all the different teams in the league. We'll see. Yeah.
You know, I was just wondering about like, have you gone and like tried out for a team, or have the teams like exclusively reached out to you and just been like, I'd love you to like go to Sheffield, and you've been like, I've got to go to Sheffield now, I guess.
Yeah, reached out. It's again, because compared to men, I feel like it's almost a smaller community. Same with like gay people, like it's a lot smaller, so it's easier to access. So it's not a case of having to go and trial. It's a case of messaging your friend who you played with 2 years ago who now plays at a certain team, and you can ask and inquire. But again, that's probably a good thing about women's football, is people are happy for you because they want you to do well, not necessarily like, come to my team. It's not like if I left a team, I can still speak to teammates, I can still speak to previous managers. It's all very inclusive in that sense, that I've not had to trial anywhere. It's just been a case of things haven't worked out, or I've wanted to play nearer to home, or just different experiences. But that is a good thing, that everyone knows everyone in girls football and women's football. So if you do want a new experience, you don't have to look far to ask, and someone's always there to want to help you in a way.
Why do you think that trans and queer people should be into football? Either playing or audience. Also, what kind of football should they be watching? Women's football.
Women's football, obviously. That's a good question, actually. This is gonna sound like, how do I word this? I think as a community of people, we should get involved in football, sports, not necessarily to push ourselves into spaces, but to normalise ourselves in them spaces, if that makes sense. So there shouldn't be situations where you don't feel able or welcomed enough to play sport, or like get involved in a hobby or take up something new. Your gender identity should never be a blockage or a barrier for that. It should just be as simple as, I want to, therefore I will try. But I think on a broader scale, I do see it as a slight responsibility to a community which has given us all a lot of sense of like pride. Like, we've all had our own individual journeys. So I'd say getting involved in football, going watching football, especially women's football, given the fact that it's growing and it needs to grow. I think minority groups can help each other a lot by supporting each other in whatever endeavours that may be. I know I saw online when the Lionesses won the Euros, there was so many people, so many young girls who didn't actually like football before because it was seen as a boys' game. And now all of a sudden you've got role models and you've got people you can aspire to, where you go, oh, actually, I like football. It was just that I didn't see myself represented in the game, therefore I didn't like it. So I think on a broader scale, trans people and gender non-conforming people and binary people, we almost have that responsibility to say, well, we need to be the people who are seen in those spaces, so that the generation coming like after us can see us there and go, oh yeah, I'm represented too. That's not going to hold me back, and my gender's not going to be a barrier for me. Yeah, but individually, I just think each to their own. Everyone should do what they want to do, and your gender should not be a barrier to it. So yeah, put yourself in spaces that you want to be in.
That's neat. Okay, yeah, we're basically at the end. But is there anything that you really wish that you got to say? A subject that you were like, oh, we didn't quite go there, and there wasn't like a moment for me to say it. And or if there isn't, do you have any final thoughts?
I probably will remember this at like 3 a.m. in the morning. I'll be like, oh shit, I should have said that. Yeah, all good.
I'm going to turn it off now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We did it!
That was good, man.